Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, March 5th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast, taped very late here on Capitol Hill. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news, read between the lines so you don't have to, and interview a whole bunch of lawmakers to gain some insight into what's going on up here.
All right, Moshe, let's not waste any time and get to the headlines here. President Trump addresses a joint session of Congress. What he said and the reaction. Moshe, you're in D.C. What is the mood?
It depends on who you ask, Jill. Do they have a D at their end of their name or an R? Because some people joyous, some people really frustrated, really angry, really concerned. Spoke to some of them. We'll have a bit of that in the podcast.
In other news, the status of multiple wildfires in North and South Carolina. TikTok's next move. Services, how the company's trying to integrate itself even further into the U.S. economy. College hopefuls have a new ultimate dream school, and no, it is not Harvard. And the house color that tells you when a neighborhood is gentrifying. Plus, Moshe has on this day in history.
Winston Churchill coins a couple key phrases on this day. We'll bring them to you.
All right, President Trump addressed a joint session of Congress on Tuesday, the first time since 2020. His speech centered on the theme of, quote, renewal of the American dream. His second term's only a few weeks old, but as we've been reporting here on this podcast, it has been chock full of executive actions on everything from immigration to the environment to eliminating DEI. He has appointed Elon Musk to run Doge and make massive cuts to the federal government. And he has put in place huge foreign policy changes from Israel to Ukraine. In fact, in Trump's first 44 days in office, he's already signed more than 80 executive orders, the most of any president in their first 100 days in nearly a century. By the way, the designated survivor Tuesday night was Doug Collins, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
For a brief moment, or I should say about 2 hours last night, if God forbid the worst case scenario happened in the U.S. Capitol, which, by the way, I'm in the building right now, Doug Collins would be taking over. He was in an undisclosed location. This is a long-time tradition, given that in that room, you had the president, the entire cabinet, all of Congress, the Supreme Court. And so they'll always select a random cabinet secretary. And so Doug Collins, for a hot second there, was going to have to lead us from what would have been tragedy.
Trump making his speech with Republicans in control of Congress, similar to his first term back in 2017, but he did lose Congress during the midterms. He opened his speech with a big "America is back," to which the Republicans in the chamber chanted, USA, USA, USA. Here is a bit from the beginning of his speech.
We have accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years. And we are just getting started.
And Moshe, then ruckus. Speaker Mike Johnson actually threw out Congressman Al Green. So before we get to the meat of the speech, you're in D.C. What was the mood at the Capitol? What was going on there?
Republicans triumphant. They run Washington, Jill. They got the White House. They got the Senate. They got the House. They got a conservative majority in the Supreme Court. And they're loving it. Now, if you talk to them privately, they won't say this on camera, but there are concerns about Elon Musk and Doge and some of the conduct there. But for the most part, they say that the president is doing what he was elected to do. They're happy with the results so far, albeit it's just been a few weeks here. And so that's Republicans. Democrats, though, in very much a fighting mood, and some of them will admit to me that the first couple of weeks of the administration, they were caught flat-footed. They weren't ready for the speed at which Trump was going to move. They'll admit that they weren't ready with litigation and court cases. And so, from Democrats, an acknowledgement they got started slower. They feel February was better than January, though they'll even say February wasn't great. And that's a bit of the conversation we had. But back to the chamber there, because before Trump could even really get rolling, there were a lot of Democrats who wanted to show their discontent tonight. And Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader who we had a chance to speak to, we'll play a bite with him in a second, had warned his members, do not become the story tonight. Nonetheless, some Democrats said, no, we're going to register visually and in audio ways our discontent. So Al Green, as you mentioned, he's a longtime congressman from Texas, Democrat. He filed impeachment charges against President Trump in the first term. He's actually already filed articles of impeachment for the second term, even though it's been like a short while here. Here's a bit of Al Green. You can make out the audio here, and then Speaker Johnson warning him and then kicking him out. Take a listen.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum in the House and to cease any further disruptions. That's your warning. Members are engaging in willful and continuing breach of decorum, and the chair is prepared to direct the Sergeant at Arms to restore order to the joint session. Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant at Arms to restore order.
So that was the interaction there. You can check out the visuals over on our Instagram page. So that was Al Green's interruption. Then you had a bunch of members who wore the word resist on the back of their shirts. They walked out at some point. You had several members holding up signs, including a congresswoman from New Mexico, Melanie Stansbury. We had a chance to speak to her. You might have caught the clip. It was actually our most shared clip of the night on Tuesday night. She held up the sign, "This is not normal." She actually had spent the most of the day staking out that seat in the aisle. And she said that she put the sign together about 10 minutes before Trump walked in. That's what she tells us. And I was like, well, what's the point of the sign? Like, what were you trying to accomplish? She goes, I want to reinforce to people that this is not normal, and that anybody out there who's like wondering, like, should I feel weird about stuff that's happening? Should I be concerned? This is me reinforcing that to them. Take a listen to a bit of Melanie Stansbury.
And in the last 6 weeks that he's been in office, he has gutted our federal government. He has violated the Constitution. He has violated personnel laws. He's fired thousands of Americans. And he has completely reoriented American foreign affairs to cozy up to Putin and to turn our backs on all of our Democratic allies. That is not normal.
So those were the Democratic protests that we saw last night. Back to the speech itself. President Trump, we should note, if you look at polling, more popular right now than he ever was during his first term. And he came in, looking pretty confident, sounding pretty confident. At one point during his speech, he was talking about the assassination attempt, where he said God saved him so he could save America. That was part of his speech last night. A couple other notes last night. If you notice, a lot of Democrats wearing pink. That was for Women's History Month and just women's rights in general. Some Democrats were wearing yellow and blue to honor Ukraine. And of course, Elon Musk made it in. He was actually wearing a suit last night, Jill.
He was, and he got a lot of airtime. Let's get to some of the issues here, starting with the economy. The president blamed the Biden administration on soaring inflation and higher gas prices. He said he is fighting to, quote, make America affordable again. Specifically, Trump did mention egg prices, again, blaming the Biden administration.
Joe Biden especially let the price of eggs get out of control. The egg price is out of control. And we're working hard to get it back down. Secretary, do a good job on that. You inherited a total mess from the previous administration.
You can hear the boos there from Democrats. Egg prices in January up about 53% from the same time a year prior. And the expectations is that egg prices are going to climb about another 40% this year, thanks to avian flu. The president didn't say what he is going to do specifically to bring egg prices down. He also promised to bring energy prices down with his famous drill, baby, drill. And he did take the opportunity as well to sell the country on Doge and Elon Musk's efforts to shrink the government. He called on Musk by name. Trump created Doge to get rid of waste and fraud in the federal government, but even some Trump voters have been critical of the way that Musk is going about it, cutting the federal workforce.
Slashing and burning, sledgehammer, a lot of various metaphors used here on Capitol Hill. The feeling that he's doing it in a very arbitrary, not thought out, not well-researched way.
So the president went through some of the items that he says Doge has identified as alleged waste, including, he says, about $7 million to make mice transgender, $59 million for illegal alien hotel rooms in New York City. He said there's about 1 million people who are 150 years old or older collecting Social Security. So he rattled off the list to some laughter in the crowd, but a little fact check here, not clear if this is all true.
No, the illegal immigrants being given money for hotel rooms, that is true. The mice transgender thing for 7 million, they say that is misconstrued, and there's a lot of various experiments that we'll do scientifically that will lead to understanding for various medications. Nonetheless, the point here is that all the money was congressionally approved to the agencies, but what they're doing now is going through the agencies, seeing what they spent the money on, and saying, this is not in line, and so we're calling it waste, even though technically the money was approved by Republicans and Democrats in Congress. Nonetheless, one of the goals here by DOJ is find a couple trillion in savings. DOJ claims they found 100 billion in savings. We've talked to you about this on the podcast. Some of that is not clear that they're actually saving that amount of money. There isn't verification on a number of these things. They probably saved a few billion, but some of the claims they've had to retract, including some of the largest claims, the 5 largest claims, they've all had to retract in terms of the amount of money they claim to be saving here. On the Social Security thing, I know he spent a lot of time and it got a lot of laughter on the number of people who are 150 and older, 175 and older, 200 and older, the 360-year-old person.
300, yes.
So
the 300-year-old person.
The deal is this. Federal law dictates that no one over the age of 115 can collect Social Security, meaning in those rare cases where you actually have someone over 115, they actually have to prove that they're still alive to Social Security to get paid out, that it completely cuts off at 115. So all these Social Security numbers where there's no date of death for them because either they never got filed over time, a lot of these are before the year 1930, which explains the age of these people. The federal government has actually looked into this and said it's actually going to cost us $10 million or so to get our books right. And since we're not actually paying any of these people out, let's not waste $10 million to get our books right, to get these 200-year-olds off the books, who, again, aren't getting actually checks, but they just exist because we haven't gotten death certificates for them from before 1930. So it's a laugher, but we should note that they're taking this a bit out of context because, again, there's been no evidence that we're breaking federal law and paying anyone over the age of 115 Social Security. But this is part of the reforms that they're talking about. There is concern about the amount of access that Elon Musk and DOJ have within Social Security. We've talked to you about that before. That's certainly something Democrats are scrutinizing up here. Other parts of his agenda that were discussed, the big bill that's going to be debated here, the big tax cut bill that's going to extend his tax cuts that already exist, but extend them further. They're set to expire this year. He also wants to end taxes on tips, taxes on overtime, make interest payments on car loans tax deductible, but only if the car is made in America. So he talked a bit about a number of agenda items, but that's all up to Congress. That was his audience last night. They're going to have to hammer it out. The big thing Republicans will have to deal with amongst themselves is how to find cuts to pay for all of this. Trump's bill is going to cost $4 or $5 trillion. They were talking about finding like $1 trillion or $2 trillion in cuts, but a lot of that would have to come from Medicaid, and that is a no-no for many voters. And Trump has said, don't touch Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. So the debate will start very soon here on Capitol Hill on all of that.
And Moshe, one surprise on Tuesday night, the president doubled down on his tariff plan. On Tuesday, his steep 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico took effect, and an extra 10% on Chinese goods. For the second day in a row, the stock market took a dive. In his speech Tuesday, Trump defended the tariffs, and he also said that on April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs will kick in, meaning whatever tariffs a country has on the U.S. will do back on them.
We have been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth, and we will not let that happen any longer.
Trump acknowledged that there will be a little, quote, disturbance in the economy because of the tariffs, but he said not much.
Yeah, one of the reasons we're a bit surprised at how he doubled down is that his Commerce Secretary just hours earlier, Howard Lutnick, had indicated on Fox News that they're going to make an announcement sometime today that there's some sort of compromise with Canada and Mexico, that he was on the phone all day Tuesday with Canada and Mexico. They're ready to make more compromises on the issues that Trump cares about. At least that's the official line. We'll tell you that because of the market drop, the significant market drop over 2 days, that's a key metric that Trump looks at for success. That was one of the reasons they're probably looking at cutting a deal here. Now, Lutnick said They're not killing the tariffs altogether, but in all likelihood, you're going to start to see maybe the percentage go down from 25%. You might see a lot more exceptions. We're going to be watching all of that today to see what unfolds when it comes to Canada-Mexico tariffs. Notably, once the Commerce Secretary Lutnick made that announcement Tuesday afternoon, guess what? Stocks went back up. The markets like that. They don't like 25% tariffs. They're concerned about that. So we'll see what happens there. The Mexicans, the Canadians, both yesterday announced counter tariffs. Justin Trudeau has a few days left as prime minister. He resigned back in January, but he was holding the office until they replace him, until his Liberal Party replaces him. He actually, at one point in his speech yesterday, Joe, referred to President Trump as Donald. He's like, I have a message for one person in America, Donald. He's like, you're a smart person, but this is very dumb. And so that was one of Trudeau's, what appears to be the last times that he'll be addressing President Trump.
President Trump also talking crime. He honored many guests in the gallery, including a border officer who helped to protect his partner from gunshots coming from Mexican cartels. He also honored a 13-year-old cancer survivor, making him an honorary Secret Service agent, as he promised to fight childhood cancer. And the president also promised to crack down on repeat offenders.
Jill, that moment with the 13-year-old cancer survivor, probably the most memorable moment of the night. If you're not like a hardcore politics person and you just like watched it as a normal person, I would say that probably was one of the more impactful things, with a child who survived cancer, wants to be a police officer. And that's what they've always done. This goes back to Reagan, this tradition of bringing regular folks in that reinforce your policy agenda or just, deserve to be honored before the country. And so that moment last night, they usually sit in the First Lady's box next to the First Lady. And that was the case last night. But the DJ moment, we put it up on Instagram, was a particularly powerful moment.
Yeah, when he gave a hug to the Secret Service director, I mean, I teared up personally. It was just, it's hard not to.
Yeah, and apparently the cancer itself is linked to chemicals that he was exposed to as a child, which then led him to RFK, and he discussed that as well. Jill, it's like the State of the Union speeches. This is effectively that, even though it wasn't officially called that because he hasn't been there a year this go around. So called it address to the joint session. It was a laundry list of items, and he started late, so he didn't get done till about 11 o'clock last night. So especially with the interruptions from Democrats, this thing lasted more than 90 minutes, nearly 100 minutes. I should note, he made a point of addressing Greenland last night, effectively saying, you'll be part of America one day, but in a very light way. He's like, we want Greenland to decide its own fate.
As long as that fate includes becoming part of the U.S.
Becoming part of the U.S. Denmark, of course, still owns it and has no interest in selling it to us.
All right, sticking with international news in the Middle East, he talked briefly about the Abraham Accords from his first administration, in which Israel normalized relationships with some Arab countries. And he also talks about getting the Israeli hostages out of Gaza. But mostly in terms of international news, he skipped straight to the war in Ukraine. The speech comes after last week's tense meeting in the Oval Office between Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, which, as we've reported, ended with a shouting match between Zelensky and Vice President J.D. Vance, with Trump basically throwing Zelensky out. Since then, it looks like things have gotten somewhat back on course. Trump saying that he got a letter from Zelensky, which said that Ukraine was committed to getting a peace deal and that he was ready to sign that mineral resources deal at any time. And Trump also said Vladimir Putin also ready for peace.
Jill, Zelensky, not even 12 hours after the U.S. announced they were cutting off all weapons aid to Ukraine, puts out this statement, very conciliatory, and it begins literally with the first line, I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. It moves on to say, we do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence, and we remember the moment when things changed, when President Trump provided Ukraine with javelins. These are the missiles that Trump provided in his first term. We are grateful for this. He goes on to say, our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. We would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive. So it appears, at least based on that note and Trump's reaction, like they're ready to hug it out. Jill.
And then there was the Democratic response to Trump's address. It was delivered by Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin. So she won her Senate seat in 2024 in a state, Michigan, that was carried by Trump. She introduced herself to the country. She's a former CIA agent and talked about how the president's tariffs will drive up costs on everything from food to medicine, mostly sticking to an economic message from Slotkin. And she seems to be getting a lot of praise all around.
Yeah, and she spoke particularly to Democrats and, frankly, all critics of the president. She said, listen, pick just one issue you're passionate about and engage. Doom scrolling doesn't count. Join a group that cares about your issue and act. And if you can't find one, start one. Some of the most important movements in our history have come from the bottom up. She also spoke to, Americans, saying, hold your elected officials, including me, accountable. Watch how they're voting. Go to town halls. Demand they take action. That's as American as apple pie. She was obviously critical of Trump. She said Reagan would be rolling over in his grave if he saw Trump's foreign policy, which is, always a thing when you mention Reagan like that. Republicans like to praise Reagan, and so implying that negative. These speeches are always very difficult, Jill. Remember Katie Britt's last year. Go back to Bobby Jindal's, which was awkward. Marco Rubio, where he tried to take a drink of water during his speech. These are always rife with challenges, especially after watching the president in this big room and applause. It's always like, let's go to the opposition in a room by themselves for 15 minutes. Typically someone you've never heard of, maybe a rising star in the party is who they typically give it to. Nonetheless, that was Slotkin. I saw Chuck Schumer earlier in the night, and he's like, you watch Alyssa Slotkin's response. We're very proud of her. Because I said to Schumer last night, is one of your issues as Democrats, like, who's your leader? Like, who's met? He's like, we have lots of leaders, and that's the best thing. There's so many leaders in this party. Like, all right, Senator Schumer, appreciate. Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? They don't have a leader, so he's got to spin. Many leaders are good. And then I will say this, Jill, as I was talking to Democrats last night, today I'm having breakfast with Speaker Johnson on the Republican side. Yesterday, I spent a lot of time with Democrats who invited creators and influencers as they realized they have to get their message out beyond the mainstream media. And so I got access, had an opportunity to interview Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader of the House. Remember, the House is a very slim majority for Republicans, 218 to 215. And he is just a couple votes. He's a couple seats away from becoming the next Speaker of the House. But I said to him, dude, I didn't say dude, but effectively I said dude. Leader Jeffries, Democrats, minority in the Senate. Democrats, minority in the House. Republican president. Conservative majority in the Supreme Court. You guys are like locked out of everything. How are you fighting this guy? Like, you don't like what he's doing. Like, do you have anything at your disposal? Is it only lawsuits? And so take a listen to what he had to say. In terms of opposing the Trump agenda, pushing back on some of the things that you've been talking about, given the makeup of Congress, is really the only route litigation?
Well, pushing back in the courts is an incredibly important route, but given the numbers that we have in the House and the fact that Republicans have such a narrow majority, with Democratic unity, just like we were together in opposing the largest cut in Medicaid history that is being contemplated by Republicans in their reckless budget. We only need 3 Republicans on any given vote at any given moment to join us. Not all of them, not the majority of them, only 3. And we're starting to see the pressure mount on Republicans in their districts for actively supporting a Trump budget and a Trump agenda that is hurting their constituents.
But it seems like he's finding ways to not involve Congress altogether this time.
Well, that's one of the reasons why pushing back in the courts is going to continue to be important. He's not winning in court, he's losing in court. There have been over 100 different lawsuits that have been filed challenging these unconstitutional and unlawful executive orders and administrative actions. And he's losing case after case after case, including the one case that has made it up to the Supreme Court, where 7 justices sided with the American people, 2 justices sided with Donald Trump.
And historically, whichever party controls the House and the Senate and the presidency at the start of the term usually loses either the House or the Senate in the midterms.
Yeah.
Which is what they appear to be banking on.
Right. Joe Biden in 2017 started with everything, lost the House in the midterms. And then you had back in 2008, Obama started with everything, and he lost it in his first midterms. So midterms, not great for presidents typically. And so that's what his hope is. Since the Senate's going to be really difficult for Democrats, given who's up this cycle. But the House, as far as the House is concerned, Jeffries is very hopeful that he's just less than 2 years away from becoming the next Speaker of the House. And so we'll continue to report this out on Instagram today. Jill, thanks for staying up late with me.
Sorry, I just fell asleep.
Wait, but we got more of the podcast
coming up.
Coming up here.
Time now for the speed read. And Moshe, you are now joining us from a different location at the Capitol.
I found a nook here, Jill. I got some folding tables behind me. I'm in the basement of the Capitol Visitor Center, finding some relative quiet to tell people the news.
Okay, wherever it is, we'll take it. From CBS News, increased fire danger warnings were issued across North and South Carolina yesterday, with winds in the region expected to pick up and humidity forecast to plummet. Firefighters are continuing to battle fires in both states that started to tear through North and South Carolina over the weekend. The largest of them in the Carolina Forest area near Myrtle Beach has spread over 2,000 acres and remained largely uncontained as of Tuesday. Officials listed about 180 wildfires in North Carolina Tuesday, which is down from more than 200 on Monday. In all, the fires covered about 3,200 acres of land.
Right now, they're still trying to figure out the causes of these multiple fires. I mean, we typically talk about fires on the West Coast. This is a rare East Coast fire here, but the conditions fueling them simple and pretty familiar to those of you out in the West Coast. A mixture of dried debris from grass and trees, along with limited rain, very low humidity, has led to conditions that have helped the fire spread here. According to the National Weather Service down there in North Carolina, the U.S. Forest Service office wrote that careless debris burning remains the leading cause of fire. So people basically lighting debris on fire. There is a case where at least one of the fires was caused by a downed power line. So they're going to continue to investigate all of that. A massive fire has engulfed 2,000 acres of Horry County, South Carolina, stemming from a forest fire that first erupted on Saturday when brush lit up in flames. And, of course, the dry spell, warm temperatures have made the situation worse. The governor down there in South Carolina, Henry McMaster, has declared a state of emergency. Same thing in North Carolina right now as they try to get these fires under control.
To tech news from Axios, TikTok is eyeing an expansion of its local services business in the United States. This is according to job postings and sources familiar with plans. So TikTok has routinely cited its positive impact on local businesses as part of its defense for remaining available in the United States, despite that law that requires the app either be banned or be sold to a U.S. owner. Well, last April, the company released a U.S. economic impact report. It claimed that there are more than 7 million businesses on TikTok that depend on the platform to grow. It claimed local businesses' use of TikTok for advertising and marketing generated $5.3 billion in taxes paid to the U.S. government in 2023. TikTok began experimenting with local services last year in Southeast Asia. The program lets creators give users vouchers for restaurants, hotels, etc. It was tested in markets like Singapore and Indonesia. TikTok is currently hiring people based in Seattle, Los Angeles, and New York to evaluate opportunities to connect local merchants and vendors with TikTok creators and users. So this is according to nearly 24 jobs posted online. Listings note that TikTok is looking to onboard lifestyle creators across topics like food and travel to help drive local services adoption and monetization opportunities.
A reminder here, TikTok officially banned here, but the president has allowed them an extension. We're currently living in a 75-day extension for TikTok that runs out in early April. So we're still waiting to hear more on what will happen next with TikTok, what American company will invest in it, how they will save TikTok, as Trump has said. Meanwhile, though, TikTok still continues here. They launched the TikTok shop a couple years ago. It's added shopping to its live stream product that has boosted sales. According to projections here from Bloomberg, TikTok Live is set to generate $77 billion in sales revenue globally within 2 years here. So there's a lot available as they make TikTok a marketplace, both for small businesses, for big merchants, and a lot is at stake here when it comes to the economy here in the U.S. and the fate of TikTok. But in the interim, TikTok continues to post hundreds of new jobs in the U.S. They're making the assumption here that they're going to figure this out.
From CNBC, Harvard University, no longer the ultimate dream school, at least among current college applicants. So this year, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, secured the top spot of the most desirable colleges. This is according to a new survey from the Princeton Review. Harvard fell from number one after a prolonged period of controversy, including anti-Semitism on campus, and the resignation of Harvard president Claudine Gay amid allegations of plagiarism. Despite the reshuffling, there is still a common element at the top of rankings. The Princeton Review's editor-in-chief says, quote, each of the schools are exceptional. However, regardless of which institution they attend, for most students, the biggest problem is still how they're going to pay for their degree.
By the way, we should note Harvard, not number one, now number two, according to this list. Jill, your rankings of the top 10 here in the Dream survey, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are in the Ivy League. So it goes MIT, Harvard is 2, 3 Stanford, 4 Princeton, 5 Yale, 6 Columbia, 7 NYU, 8 familiar school to you, Jill Wagner, University of Michigan, up there at number 8 on the Dream list. Penn is number 9, and then UCLA rounds out the top 10.
It's funny because at Michigan, they call themselves Harvard of the West.
But Michigan's not very far west.
I never thought it made a lot of sense.
Harvard of the Midwest?
No, Harvard of the West.
Oh, well, I have lots of thoughts about that. But either way, you're number 8 on the Dream list still. Years after graduating. Jill, not to harp on this, but Michigan, literally the state of Michigan is in the Eastern time zone. Like what? Like I've heard of like Stanford as a Harvard of the West, but like it's in California. Anyway, I'm derailing the speed read here, but I'm very curious about how this name got started. So if you could dig into it as I finish the story here, let me know what you come up with for the origins.
Even the fight song is Champions of the West. They just are going in.
Was it the West? I mean,
they're
it was
on the western part of the Eastern time zone.
The western part of the Eastern time zone.
Yes.
That's a motto if I ever heard one. Anyway, back to this Dream survey. A whopping 95% of families said financial aid would be necessary to pay for college. 77% said it's extremely or very necessary, especially for some of these schools in this list. These are schools that are, up to 80 to 100 grand a year for tuition. MIT remains one of the hardest schools to get into. Its acceptance rate, 4.5%. Its tuition, $85,000 a year, though it does offer pretty generous aid packages. Among the class of 2024, 87% graduated debt-free, according to the school. Now, that probably speaks to a combination of folks who could afford to pay it outright without taking student loans, as well as financial aid. Now, MIT will tell you that for that price tag, the average graduate in 2024 had a starting salary of $126,000 a year, according to the latest survey. That's twice the national average. So, while we talk about whether it's worth it to go to these colleges, take on these loans, MIT is arguing, yes, it is.
And finally, from the Washington Post, there's a house color that tells you when a neighborhood is gentrifying. Moshe, any guesses?
Jill, it was a very popular color in the background in your previous home.
Was it? It was in my office.
Yeah, your office. I feel like I stared at the color gray in your office, so I'm going with gray.
Yes, you are correct, Moshe.
I know you moved recently, but Jill, you don't remember what color your office was?
You know what it is? Only my office was gray.
Ah, okay.
So that's where you kind of threw
That's where
me.
I got it from. Okay.
Okay, a Washington Post color analysis of D.C. found that shades of gray permeate neighborhoods where the white population has increased and the black population has decreased. In neighborhoods where other markers of gentrification have spiked over the past decade, increased home prices, more noise complaints, and the displacement of black residents, the number of gray homes has notably increased. The analysis looked at houses that were newly built or built on lots where houses had been torn down. Homes that might have once been painted reds, yellows, and browns have given way to houses in hues that range from shark fin to deep space. The analysis allowed tints and shades of colors to be grouped into color families. In every ward, the most popular new exterior paint colors have been desaturated tones. In some areas, more than half are now painted white, black, or gray. An influx of affluent and predominantly white residents moving to inner city neighborhoods has flipped the defining 20th century phenomenon of white flight on its head. And in cities like DC, it's changed the makeup of neighborhoods that were once majority and in some cases almost exclusively Black.
It's interesting, and this might not actually be stuff people think about, but ultimately painting brick, for example, requires more upkeep, more expense. It signals you can afford to keep it clean. In San Francisco, where homes are known for their color, the gray wave has triggered backlash among longtime residents that appreciate the city's classic look. You know the look from the Full House opening sequence of the painted ladies, the row of colorful Victorian houses there. And so in San Francisco, they're like, wait a second, you're changing the aesthetic of the city. We don't want these gray houses here. In San Francisco, we're all about color. But still, you do see this shift to gray in places like the Mission. And some other areas of San Francisco. Gray homes are also being built in mid-sized cities like Nashville, where development is driving population shifts. Houses are being flipped, torn down, rebuilt, a lot of gray. The story also notes Chicago, seeing more and more gray in certain areas. And overall, the people who study this stuff, Jill, say that these tend to go in about 15-year cycles. And so right now, we're ending the gray cycle. I can't wait for what comes next.
Yellow? Is it possible?
All right. Jill is making
yellow.
a prediction right here on the podcast that the next, as we end the gray phase of homes, yellow will be making a comeback in this next generation.
No, you know what I really think? Wood.
Oh.
Like light wood is going to be the color.
All right. You heard it here first. We're going to consult the audio here in a couple of years and see if Jill was right. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We go back to the 18th century, 1770 to be exact. The Boston Massacre took place on this day. Harassed by a mob, British troops guarding the Boston Customs House shot into a crowd of civilians, killing 8, wounding several others. Effectively jeering Bostonians, some of them drunk, were slinging snowballs at this group of soldiers. One soldier lost control as one of the troops was struck. The soldiers fired despite explicit orders to the contrary. Notable here, and some of you might be familiar with this piece of American history, future founding father and future president John Adams defended the British soldiers to the disappointment of some of his neighbors there in Boston, as well as the disappointment of his cousin Sam Adams, who was running a group called the Sons of Liberty. He was all about, revolution there, and he was annoyed that cousin John Adams was defending the British troops, but Adams was like, listen, I believe in fair trial and equal justice, no matter who you are. And so what was interesting here when it comes to this trial, he would win acquittal for nearly all of the British troops there. 2 got charges of manslaughter, though, and were convicted. And back then in Boston, that meant you were branded. Your body was branded with the letter M for manslaughter. On this day in 1946, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill popularized the term Iron Curtain. He was giving a speech in Missouri, actually, and described the separation of the Soviet Union and what was befalling Europe at the time as the Soviet Union occupied and controlled most of Eastern Europe. He said that an Iron Curtain was falling across Europe. He also coined the term special relationship. It's a term we still use. You actually heard it last week. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, talking about the special relationship we have between the US and Great Britain. That was actually coined by Winston Churchill and has been uttered by every Prime Minister and President since then, both in real life and the movies, Jill.
Love Actually?
Yep. Love Actually. Special relationship. Though in Love Actually, there's a call out there, right?
I feel like the press conference scene in Love Actually would have been what happened if Zelensky and Trump actually held a press conference after their meeting.
Honestly, you could say the Trump-Zelensky thing was partially inspired by the Love Actually scene, right?
The question is, after Zelensky left the White House, did Trump dance to Jump for My Love? Or
around the White
I'm
House?
Singing it terribly.
No,
Around the White House.
No, they only play YMCA at the White House. That's his favorite song. Speaking of music, we end here with a bit of music history. On this day, in 1971, Led Zeppelin introduced one of their all-time classics for the first time in a concert. Take a listen. Led Zeppelin introduced one of their all-time classics for the first time in a concert, Stairway to Heaven in Belfast. Robert Plant spent much of the 70s answering questions about the lyrics he wrote for Stairway. When asked why the song was so popular, he said it could be an abstraction adding, depending on what day it is, I still interpret the song Stairway to Heaven differently. And I wrote the lyrics. And finally, a bit of movie history on this day. Cruel Intentions, an iconic movie of the late 90s. Sarah Michelle Gellar, Ryan Phillippe, Reese Witherspoon all appeared in the movie. It premiered in theaters on this day in 1999.
All right, another classic movie there. Thank you guys for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow. I'll be in Arizona, Jill.
Where in the world is Moshe? New. You're back to that. You're like, I feel like you had a phase a while ago where you were really traveling.
I was traveling a lot. I should note, for the record, for all Michigan grads, Arizona is to the west of Michigan.
Leave us alone.
I'm a geography nerd, Jill.
You know what I noticed?
It perplexes me.
GW was not on the top 10 list.
No, I understand that.
You're just like, Michigan people don't understand geography. That's all.
Yeah, that's it. You don't need to mock my school. My school is niche taste, Jill. You have to want to go to school in Washington, D.C.
My father's a GW alum.
I don't think we've ever discussed that.
Which is weird. We've been friends for a long time. I don't know why we never discussed that. Yes.
What year did he graduate GW?
Somewhere in the early 70s, maybe 1971. Maybe.
So we need to chat, because that was a remarkable time on campus at the height of the Vietnam protests, a couple blocks from the White House. I want to chat with him about his experience there.
I'm sure he would be happy to reminisce.
All right, everybody. We'll leave the reminiscing for after the podcast.
We'll do it offline.
Yeah, we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast.